The champagne flutes clinked too loudly in the oak-paneled dining room, and Marcus felt the sound dig into his chest like a splinter. His father stood at the head of the table, silver-haired and square-shouldered, raising his glass toward the chandelier. "To Marcus," he said, voice smooth as polished marble, "who's found contentment in his quiet pursuits." Around the table, relatives smiled uncomfortably. Marcus's sister looked down at her plate. His mother touched the stem of her glass but didn't lift it. And Marcus sat frozen, fork halfway to his mouth, as his father's gaze landed on him. Brief, dismissive, final. The word contentment hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Marcus knew what it really meant. Failure. 20 minutes later, his phone would buzz with a single message, and everything his father thought he knew about his son's life would shatter like that champagne flute hitting the floor.
The Calloway family dinner had always been a performance. Marcus understood that even as a child, watching his father preside over Thanksgiving meals and quarterly gatherings with the same authority he brought to boardrooms. Gerald Calloway didn't just sit at the head of the table, he commanded it. Every story he told was a lesson. Every question he asked was a test. Tonight's gathering was supposed to celebrate his younger sister's engagement, but the conversation had drifted, as it always did, to business. Gerald spoke about quarterly earnings, about a merger he'd orchestrated with a pharmaceutical distributor, about expansion into the Asian markets. Marcus's brother-in-law nodded along, taking mental notes. His uncle asked pointed questions about stock options, and Marcus stayed quiet, cutting his steak into smaller and smaller pieces. "You're awfully silent tonight, son." His father's voice sliced across the table. "Nothing to add about the market?" Marcus looked up. The dining room was warm, almost stifling, with the fireplace crackling and the scent of rosemary and garlic thick in the air. "I've been focused on other projects," he said carefully. "Other projects." Gerald set down his knife. "You mean that consulting work you've been doing? What do you call it again? Strategic advisory?" "Something like that. For small firms, I assume. Startups." His father's tone was light, conversational, but Marcus heard the edge beneath it. "I respect ambition, Marcus, but at some point, a man needs to recognize his ceiling. Not everyone is built for the executive suite." The table went quiet. Marcus's mother reached for her water glass. His sister Emily shot him a look that said, "Don't engage," but Marcus felt the heat rising in his throat anyway. "I'm doing fine, Dad." "Fine." Gerald smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Fine is what you say when you've stopped trying to be great." He stood, lifting his champagne flute, and the rest of the table reluctantly followed. "To Marcus, who's found contentment in his quiet pursuits. May we all be so lucky to know our limits." The toast landed like a slap. Marcus didn't raise his glass. He set his fork down, pushed back his chair, and excused himself to the hallway. Behind him, he heard his mother murmur something placating, heard his father's laughter, genial, dismissive, final. Marcus stood in the marble entryway, breathing hard, staring at the family portraits lining the walls. Gerald Calloway shaking hands with a governor. Gerald cutting a ribbon at a new factory opening. Gerald receiving a business award, his smile wide and confident. There were no pictures of Marcus. Not in this hallway. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, still shaking with anger, and saw the message from his lead attorney. "Documents signed, deal closes in 18 minutes. Jets on standby. Congratulations, Mr. President." Marcus stared at the screen. The anger in his chest shifted, crystallizing into something colder and sharper. He typed back, "Change of plans. Land at the estate. I'll meet you on the south lawn." The reply came immediately. "Understood. ETA 22 minutes. Marcus pocketed his phone and walked back into the dining room. His father was telling a story about a competitor who'd tried to undercut him on a contract, gesturing with his wine glass, his audience rapt. Marcus didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the table, hands in his pockets, and waited. Gerald noticed him first. "Back so soon? I thought you were making a dramatic exit." I wanted to say something before I leave. Marcus kept his voice even. You're right. I'm not CEO material. His father's smile widened. It takes a strong man to admit. I'm not CEO material because I'm beyond that now. Marcus pulled out his phone, pulled up the signed acquisition documents, and set it on the table in front of his father. As of 17 minutes from now, I'll be president and majority shareholder of a company you might recognize, Callaway Pharmaceuticals. The room went still. Gerald picked up the phone, his face draining of color as he scrolled through the legal filing. Emily leaned over, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus's mother stood, knocking over her water glass, but no one moved to clean it. The water pooled on the white tablecloth, spreading slowly toward the centerpiece. This is a joke, Gerald said, but his voice cracked. It's not. Marcus took the phone back. I've been working on this acquisition for 11 months. 3 investment firms, 2 private equity partners, and 1 very motivated board of directors who were tired of your quarter-over-quarter stagnation. The deal closes in 16 minutes. You'll receive formal notification Monday morning, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. Gerald stood, gripping the edge of the table. You can't. This company has been in my family for 32 years. I know. I grew up in it. You built something incredible, Dad, but you also built a reputation for cruelty. Your board wanted out. Your shareholders wanted change. I gave them both. His father's face twisted. You ungrateful. I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this because I can. Because I spent the last decade learning everything you refused to teach me. Because I'm not content. I never was. Outside, the sound of rotor blades began to thrum in the distance, low and rhythmic, growing louder. Marcus checked his watch. That'll be my ride. We'll talk terms on Monday. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. He walked out of the dining room, through the marble entryway, and out the front doors. Behind him, he heard his father shouting, heard his mother trying to calm him, heard the crash of something, maybe a glass, maybe a chair, hitting the floor. Marcus didn't look back. He walked across the manicured lawn, past the fountain and the rose garden, toward the open stretch of grass where the helicopter was descending, its spotlight cutting through the twilight. The pilot stepped out, extending a hand. Mr. Callaway, congratulations on the acquisition. Thank you. He shook his hand and climbed into the cabin. Through the window, he could see his father standing on the front steps, illuminated by the porch lights, staring at the helicopter with an expression Marcus had never seen before. Shock and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. The helicopter lifted, and the estate shrank below them, the lights of the house swallowed by the gathering dark. Marcus leaned back in his seat, exhaled, and let himself smile. The war was over. He'd won.
The story didn't start with a helicopter or a billion-dollar deal. It started 11 years earlier, in a cramped office on the 3rd floor of Callaway Pharmaceuticals, where Marcus spent his first summer internship fetching coffee and filing contracts. He was 22, fresh out of business school and desperate to prove himself. His father had made it clear the internship wasn't a gift, it was a test. You want a place in this company? You earn it like everyone else, Gerald had said, leaning back in his leather chair. No special treatment, no shortcuts. Marcus had nodded, eager, in earnest. He worked 60-hour weeks that summer, stayed late to review reports no one asked him to read, memorized the names of every department head and supplier. He thought if he worked hard enough, his father would see his potential. He thought effort would be enough. It wasn't. At the end of the summer, Gerald called him into his office. You did fine work, he said, but I don't see executive material. You're too cautious, too soft. This industry doesn't reward nice. Marcus had felt the words like a punch. I can learn to be tougher. You can't learn instinct, son. Some men are born for the boardroom. Others are born to support them. There's no shame in knowing which one you are. Marcus left the office, walked to his car, and sat in the parking lot for an hour, hands gripping the steering wheel. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just made a decision. If his father wouldn't teach him, he'd teach himself. If Callaway Pharmaceuticals wouldn't give him a seat at the table, he'd build his own table. And one day, he'd come back. The next decade was a blur of calculated moves. Marcus took a job at a mid-sized consulting firm, worked his way up to senior strategist, then left to start his own advisory group. He specialized in hostile acquisitions and corporate restructuring. Unglamorous work, but it taught him how to read balance sheets, how to identify weaknesses, how to turn a struggling company into a profitable one. He built a reputation for being ruthless when necessary and fair when possible. CEOs started calling him for advice. Boards started inviting him to sit in on meetings. And all the while, he watched his father's company. He tracked its quarterly earnings, read every shareholder report, noted every misstep. Callaway Pharmaceuticals was profitable, but it had plateaued. Gerald's aggressive expansion strategy had left the company over-leveraged. 2 of his key patents were set to expire. The board was restless. Marcus saw the opening and moved carefully. He reached out to disgruntled board members, pitched them a vision of stable growth and ethical leadership. He partnered with investment firms who shared his philosophy. He assembled a coalition quietly, patiently, over 18 months. And when the time was right, he made his offer. The board voted in his favor. Gerald never saw it coming. Now, sitting in the helicopter, as it cut through the night sky, Marcus thought about that cramped office on the 3rd floor. He thought about his father's voice. "You're too soft. This industry doesn't reward nice." And wondered if Gerald remembered saying it. Probably not. It had been a throwaway line, a casual dismissal, but Marcus had carried it like a stone in his chest for 11 years. The helicopter landed on a private airstrip 40 miles north of the estate. A black sedan was waiting, and Marcus climbed in, pulling out his laptop. His lead attorney, David Chen, was already on a video call, his face pixelated but smiling. "How did it go?" David asked. "Better than expected." Marcus typed in his password, pulled up the signed documents. "He looked like I punched him." "I imagine he feels that way." David's tone was wry. "You just took his legacy." "I took a company that was stagnating under poor leadership," Marcus corrected. "The legacy was already tarnished. I'm just cleaning it up." "Fair. So what's next? Press release Monday morning?" "Yes. Keep it professional. Emphasize continuity and growth. I don't want this to look like a revenge play." "Even though it is?" Marcus hesitated. Was it revenge? He told himself for months that this was about business, about doing what was right for the company and its employees. But sitting in the back of the sedan, still tasting the champagne from dinner, he couldn't quite shake the image of his father's face when he'd seen the acquisition documents. The shock. The betrayal. Marcus said, "It's not revenge. It's correction." David smiled. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, Mr. President." The call ended, and Marcus closed his laptop. Outside, the highway stretched ahead, dotted with headlights and the faint glow of distant towns. He thought about his mother, about the look on her face when he'd walked out. She hadn't said anything, but her eyes had been wet. His sister had texted him twice already. "Call me, please." But he hadn't responded. He didn't know what to say. The sedan pulled up to a private airfield where his jet was waiting, sleek and white, under the floodlights. The pilot greeted him at the base of the stairs, and Marcus climbed aboard, sinking into the leather seat. The cabin smelled like coffee and new upholstery. He poured himself a glass of water, stared out the window, and waited for the engines to start. His phone buzzed. Another text from Emily. "Dad's not talking. Mom's in her room. What the hell did you do?" Marcus typed back, "I did what I had to. I'll explain later." The response came immediately. "You just destroyed him." Marcus stared at the message. Was that true? Had he destroyed his father, or just his father's illusions? Gerald Callaway had spent 30 years building an empire and a reputation. He'd been untouchable, unshakable, the man who always won. And now his son, the one he dismissed as too soft, too cautious, had taken it all away. Marcus put the phone down and closed his eyes. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt hollow, like he'd won a battle but couldn't remember why he'd been fighting. The jet lifted into the air, and the world below became a grid of lights and shadows. He leaned back, exhaled, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, he'd face the aftermath. Tonight, he just wanted to disappear into the dark. But even as he drifted off, he heard his father's voice in his head. Some men are born for the boardroom. Others are born to support them. And wondered if he had proven Gerald right or proven him wrong. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe it didn't matter anymore.
Monday morning arrived with a press release and a firestorm. The acquisition of Callaway Pharmaceuticals by Vanguard Holdings, the private equity consortium Marcus had assembled, was front-page news in every business journal. Son ousts father in $1.2 billion pharma takeover, read one headline. Callaway empire crumbles under family feud, declared another. Marcus's phone rang non-stop. Reporters wanted comments. Industry analysts wanted interviews. His mother wanted him to come home. He ignored most of the calls. Instead, he sat in his corner office, newly renovated, still smelling faintly of paint, and stared at the skyline. The city stretched out below him, glass towers catching the morning light, and Marcus felt unmoored. He'd spent 11 years working toward this moment, and now that it was here, he didn't know what to do with it. His assistant, Rachel, knocked on the door. "Your sister's here," she said gently. "She doesn't have an appointment, but—" "Send her in." Emily walked in looking exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her coat still buttoned. She dropped into the chair across from him without preamble. "You couldn't have warned me," she said. "I had to find out at dinner in front of everyone." "I couldn't risk a leak." "You're my sister, Marcus, not a business rival." Her voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what it's been like? Dad won't leave his study, Mom's pretending everything's fine, but she's not sleeping. And you," she gestured at the office, at the floor-to-ceiling windows and the polished desk, "you're up here playing king." Marcus flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Emily leaned forward. "You humiliated him, in his own home, in front of his family. You could have done this quietly, professionally, but instead you made it a spectacle." "He made it a spectacle," he shot back. "He's the one who stood up and toasted my dead-end job in front of everyone. He's the one who spent my entire life telling me I wasn't good enough." "So, this is payback?" "This is justice." Emily stared at him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the city hummed with traffic and construction and life, indifferent to their argument. Finally, Emily sighed. "He's still our father, Marcus. And whether you like it or not, you just broke him." "He broke me first." "Then you're both broken." Emily stood, pulling her coat tighter. "I came here because Mom asked me to. She wants you to come to dinner. Tomorrow night, just the family." "I don't think that's a good idea." "I don't care what you think. She's your mother, and she's asking. So you'll come, or you'll explain to her why you won't." Emily walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're wrong. Dad was cruel to you. But cruelty doesn't erase cruelty. It just multiplies it." She left, and the office felt too quiet. Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the contract in front of him, pages of legalese outlining his new role, his responsibilities, his authority. He was president now, majority shareholder, the man in charge. But all he felt was tired. That evening, he drove to his mother's house. Not the estate. She'd left after the dinner, retreating to a smaller home she'd bought years ago, a place his father rarely visited. It was a modest 2-story in a quiet neighborhood, with a garden his mother tended herself and a front porch lined with potted plants. Marcus parked in the driveway, sat for a moment, then walked to the door. His mother answered before he could knock. "Marcus!" She pulled him into a hug, and she felt her shoulders shaking. "I'm so glad you came." "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to—" "Don't." She stepped back, wiping her eyes. "Don't apologize. Not to me. Come in. I made tea." They sat in the living room, a cozy space with worn furniture and family photos on the mantel, pictures his father never displayed. Marcus saw himself at 10, gap-toothed and grinning. Emily at 15 holding a soccer trophy. Their mother on her wedding day, young and radiant, standing beside a man Marcus barely recognized as his father. "He's not handling this well," his mother said, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "He feels betrayed." "He should." The words came out harsher than Marcus intended. He spent my entire life telling me I'd never be good enough. He humiliated me at every opportunity, and now he's upset because I proved him wrong? His mother set the teapot down carefully. Your father is a proud man. Pride is his strength, but it's also his weakness. He doesn't know how to admit when he's wrong. Then maybe it's time he learned. Maybe. She sipped her tea, but you need to understand something, Marcus. Your father's cruelty, it didn't come from nowhere. He was raised by a man who believed kindness was weakness. He built his company through sheer force of will, and he thought that's what you needed too. He thought if he pushed you hard enough, you'd become strong. He didn't push me, he dismissed me. I know, bro, he is on. Two, he made himself feel confident by saying he could take his father's.
Wednesday arrived cold and overcast, the sky a flat expanse of gray that pressed down on the estate like a lid. Marcus drove through the gates at 2:55 p.m., his hands steady on the wheel, but his heart hammering. The grounds looked the same, perfectly manicured lawns, the marble fountain in the center of the circular drive, the grand oak doors that had always seemed designed to intimidate. But something felt different. Maybe it was him. He parked, walked to the door, and knocked. His mother answered, her expression carefully neutral. "He's in the study," she said. "I'll be in the garden if you need me." "Thanks, Mom." She squeezed his arm, then disappeared down the hallway. Marcus stood in the foyer, staring at the family portraits, and tried to steady his breathing. He'd faced hostile boards and aggressive negotiators. He'd closed deals worth hundreds of millions, but walking to his father's study felt harder than any of it. The door was open. Gerald sat behind his desk, the same massive mahogany piece he'd had for as long as Marcus could remember. He looked older, his hair grayer, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes were sharp when they met Marcus's. "Close the door," he said. Marcus did. He sat in the chair across from the desk, the same chair where he'd sat for every lecture, every disappointment, every dismissal. The room smelled like leather and old books and the faint ghost of cigar smoke. "You wanted to talk," Marcus said. Gerald leaned back, fingers steepled. "You've put me in an impossible position. I put you in the position you created." Marcus kept his voice even. "Your board wanted change. Your shareholders wanted leadership. I gave them both." "You gave them a coup." Gerald's voice was tight. "You turned my own company against me." "Your company was failing, Dad. Quarter-over-quarter stagnation, over-leveraged acquisitions, patents expiring. You were too proud to see it, but your board did. I just offered them a solution." Gerald's jaw tightened. "And you think that makes you a hero?" "No, I think it makes me competent, something you never believed I could be." The words hung in the air. Gerald stood, walked to the window, stared out at the grounds. "You think I underestimated you," he said finally. "Maybe I did. But do you know why? Because I wasn't ruthless enough? Because I cared about people? Because you reminded me of someone I used to be." Gerald turned, and for the first time, Marcus saw something raw in his father's expression. "When I started this company, I was idealistic. I thought I could build something meaningful, something that helped people. But the industry didn't care about idealism. It cared about profit margins and market share. So I learned to be harder. I learned to make the difficult calls. And I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought if I pushed you the same way I was pushed, you'd survive it. You'd become strong." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "You didn't push me, Dad. You broke me." "I know." Gerald sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "I know I did. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand I never thought you were weak. I thought you were too good for this industry, too kind. And I didn't know how to protect you from it except by trying to harden you." The confession landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Marcus sat in silence, trying to process it. His father, the man who'd spent decades projecting invincibility, was admitting he'd been afraid his son wouldn't survive in a world that almost destroyed him. "You should have told me that," Marcus said quietly, "instead of making me feel like I was never enough." I should have. Gerald's voice was rough. I didn't know how. I was raised by a man who believed showing weakness was a sin. I thought if I was honest about my fears, you'd see me as a failure. I would have seen you as human. Gerald laughed bitterly. Maybe that was the problem. I didn't want to be human. I wanted to be untouchable. And now, he gestured at the room, at the company he'd built and lost. Now I'm neither. Marcus looked at his father, at the man who'd cast such a long shadow over his life, and realized something. The shadow was just a man, flawed, afraid, capable of cruelty and tenderness in equal measure, and Marcus had spent so long trying to escape that shadow that he never stopped to ask if his father was trapped in it too. I'm not giving the company back, Marcus said. It's too late for that, but I'm not trying to erase you either. You built something incredible, Dad. I want to honor that. I just want to do it better. Gerald nodded slowly. And you think you can? I know I can, because I learned from you, the good and the bad. I learned how to be strategic, how to be decisive, how to fight for what I believe in, but I also learned what not to do, how not to treat people, how not to measure worth. Gerald was quiet for a long time. Then he stood, walked around the desk, and extended his hand. Then, I suppose he should congratulate you, Mr. President. Marcus stood, took his father's hand, and felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't even reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall they'd both built, brick by brick, over decades. They shook hands, and Gerald's grip was firm, but not crushing. I'd like to stay involved, he said, if you'll have me. Not as CEO, I know that ship has sailed, but as an advisor, I still know this industry, I still have relationships. I could be useful. Marcus considered it. Part of him wanted to say no, to keep the distance he'd fought so hard to create, but another part, smaller, quieter, but insistent, remembered his mother's question, do you want this to be the end or the beginning? We can try, Marcus said, but on new terms. No more hierarchy, no more tests. We work together or we don't work at all. Gerald nodded. Agreed. They stood in the study, two men who'd spent years locked in silent combat, and for the first time Marcus felt like he could breathe. The weight he'd carried, the need to prove himself, the need to escape, began to lift. Not completely, but enough. His mother appeared in the doorway, eyes red but hopeful. I made coffee, and your sister's on her way. I thought, if you're both willing, we could have dinner. A real one. No toasts, no speeches. Just family. Marcus looked at his father, Gerald looked at him, and after a moment, they both nodded. I'd like that, Marcus said. They walked together to the dining room, and this time the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was tentative, uncertain, but not hostile. And when Emily arrived 20 minutes later, breathless and anxious, she stopped in the doorway and stared at the three of them, Marcus, Gerald, and their mother, sitting around the table with coffee mugs and cautious smiles. Did I miss the apocalypse? Emily asked. Just the beginning of something better, their mother said. Dinner was quiet, awkward in places, but real. They talked about the company's future, about Emily's wedding plans, about the community theater production. Gerald asked Marcus about his strategy for the next quarter, and Marcus answered honestly, without defensiveness. They didn't resolve everything. Decades of hurt didn't disappear over pot roast and mashed potatoes, but they started. And when Marcus left that night, driving through the gates as the first stars appeared, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not vindication, but peace. The war was over. Not because he'd won, but because they'd both laid down their weapons. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Thank you for coming. Your father is reading the strategic plan you sent. He has notes, but he's impressed. We both are. Love you. Marcus typed back, love you too, and drove home through the dark. The city stretched out around him, full of lights and noise and life, and for the first time in 11 years, Marcus felt like he belonged in it. Not as his father's son, not as the man who'd proven everyone wrong, just as himself. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.